friends. Happy Thursday. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. I am Katie, joined by Chris and John. How's it going, guys?
Good.
Hello.
Good. On this week's show, we are talking about demystifying social media algorithms. LinkedIn is one of the most quote unquote locked down systems in terms of being able to get data out of it. Twitter is forever evolving. There was even a big announcement this morning, which I know Chris will get into. But believe it or not, these social media platforms actually do tell you how they work. They just don't do it in a way that most of us, myself included, can understand. They publish deeply technical academic and development papers with formulas and words that have 6 and 7 syllables, and you need a dictionary and a thesaurus. And so it's not for everybody. Not everybody can just pick up this paper and go, oh, okay, now I know that I need to post at 2 o'clock instead of 3 o'clock. It definitely isn't an instruction manual that way. So on today's episode, we're going to cover how we go about finding out the information so that we can then share it with you. So where to find the information, how to decode it, demystify it, and pick through it to find the relevant information, and then what the heck to do about it. And we're going to focus specifically on Twitter and LinkedIn. So Chris, there's been a lot going on with these platforms. Where would you like to start?
I mean, that's a very good question. So a lot of the stuff revolves around people asking the question, does this work or does that work? And this topic came up because I was chatting with a group of PR folks, actually, who were dispensing all kinds of advice, like, oh, you shouldn't have more than 3 hashtags for this, when you shouldn't, post more than this many times in a row. And I'm like, where did you get this information? Like, and it's funny. It's almost like urban legends and myths that just get passed down that, those things might have been true at one point in time, just like old SEO myths, like, oh, you should put like all your keywords in white text at the bottom of your page, stuff that worked great in 2006, but not so much 17 years later. And so that's where this topic got started, was listening to the advice people are passing around that sounds credible, but doesn't have any basis in fact. So with all of these networks, the number one question, sort of the purpose, if you think about the 5 Ps, the purpose is we need to know what works, right? If you pull together a user story as a social media marketer, I need to know how Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook, whatever, ranks and scores content so that my content gets seen by more people, or my content gets engaged with by more people. I think that would probably be the place to start. Now, Katie and John, I'll ask you both this. Besides, pretend you didn't work for Trust Insights and you didn't have a nerd just sitting around all day willing to answer your questions. If you didn't have that, maybe think back to our agency days when we worked at agencies. How would you go about getting this information of what works?
It's always been the past for me is you do go to all those articles and you grab all the urban legends, but then you test everything because you don't believe the urban legends. Like they're a good point to start, but there's no proof that any of them are real. And yeah, I'd say it's 50-50 or worse, where you try some of these things and you're like, yeah, no, actually that makes things worse off.
Yeah, my instinct would be to do some sort of a web search on, best practices for, getting high engagement on LinkedIn or Twitter, and see if there are, noted experts on the subject who've written about it, and see what they have to say, and just using that as a starting point. Like, if I didn't work with you, but I'd be like, oh, well, what does Chris Penn say about best practices for posting on LinkedIn? What is he saying works? And so looking at those, trusted sources to see if they've already done the work for me.
I'm curious that neither of you mentioned going to the companies themselves. And the specific place that we would think about would be the engineering blogs. So both Twitter and LinkedIn have engineering blogs where the engineers say, like, yeah, here's the thing and how it works. Why wouldn't you start there?
Probably the same reason we're building this live stream episode is that neither myself nor John are engineers. We're more of the layman. I mean, sorry to speak for you, John, but I can say to myself, I'm not someone who's going to seek out an engineering blog because a lot of times, at least in my experience, they're not written for people who don't understand how engineering, development, and IT work. So they don't necessarily go out of the way to summarize a bullet point and be like, so all of this said, here are the 3 things you need to do.
Okay.
It's funny too that they do terrible SEO. Like I've never had some random question like this and looked it up, and you always find 16 marketing blogs that have, top 10 of whatever, and you never see one of these engineering articles. Like I've never stumbled upon an engineering article aside from one that you've shared.
And that's a really important point because, to what Katie was saying, it's not meant for the general public, right? This is meant to instruct other people as to how they think about solving their problems. And one of the things that we're gonna notice as we kind of take a tour through these things is that it's almost detective work. You will note, particularly with LinkedIn tells you how everything works, but across a bunch of different papers. So some of the pieces that you need to know are in one paper, some of the pieces you need to know in another paper, and you have to have the wherewithal to know that those pieces are related together. But here's an additional question. Why would we not take one of these things? This is a beer for folks who are just listening to this. This is a Goose IPA. Why would we not take a few of these things plus some friends or colleagues who have engineering experience and say, hey, can we sit down for 30 minutes and go through these engineering blogs? I know I don't know what these things are about, but you might. Can you? And here's what I'm looking to find. Can you help me distill that? Why would that not be an approach that, say, an agency president or an agency CEO would take?
I think it really depends on the relationship. And so, it could be seen as, okay, tell me all of the secrets that you know so that I can do better than you. And so before you can just, sit down with someone and start, picking their brain about what they know, you need to have that relationship established. Not everyone's willing to give away, you know, how they know what they know, for lack of a better term. It could be an option, but again, it sort of goes back to, what the way that I was approaching it of, find out who in your network that you trust, what have they, what work have they done already? What have they written about it? And so it may sort of stand in for that, sitting down with someone. But I'm also adding to my list of marketing urban legends, bringing beers to IT, because I think that's sort of an antiquated way of looking at it.
True. And
I see beers were just from the time before. It would be great if we could get back to that, but it's been a long time.
I think it'll also have to be a better beer because this one looks like it says it's entirely all hops. So the starting place then is to look at these blogs, and you're looking for specific topics, and that's I guess would be the first place to start. So let's pull open here just the homepage of the Twitter engineering blog. And you'll note as we start to scroll through it, there are different topics. There are things that are around security, around infrastructure, data quality and stuff. And what we're looking for specifically, if we want to know what works on Twitter, is to be looking for articles that talk about the Twitter network itself. Now, you'll notice there's some words and phrases that keep popping up over and over again, right? So you'll see some natural language stuff. You'll see some stuff about privacy, but you'll keep noticing that these terms, graph neural networks or graph networks, just show up over and over and over again. And that's your first indicator that is a core technology that is part of Twitter. It's something that is really important.
But I guess that sort of goes back to these aren't meant for non-technical people, because I would first, again, assuming I don't work with Trust Insights, I would first need to know what a graph neural network is, that it's even an important thing. I would need to know what geometric deep learning meant. I would need to know what CAS meant. You have to learn a different language. So it goes back to, do I need to have a dictionary with me to understand what I'm even looking for? So it sounds like your first pro tip is try to find the terms that are repeated multiple times to see what kind of importance they carry for understanding the algorithm.
Exactly. And then the second thing to do is to start popping open some of these articles and, without digging too deeply in them, just looking to see what other articles they all link to. One of them is this one. This one is linked to a lot within Twitter's own blog. This is sort of a cornerstone piece of content that a lot of other pieces of content talk about and reference. And so even if you don't necessarily know the topology of with all the language and stuff, you can say, this article's got a lot of links. It's kind of like doing a primitive human version of SEO. Like, where's all the links going? Oh, they're all going to this article. And that's probably, I would say, your second tip to know. Yeah, there are some articles that are more important than others. There's some that are cornerstone pieces of knowledge. A good indicator that an article is really, really important is that it will also typically have a link to a published academic paper. Right, so there's a published academic paper in this case that has been approved and peer reviewed about this core technology at Twitter. You look puzzled, Katie.
It's not so much that I'm puzzled, but as someone who has written an academic paper, again, it's not for everyone. It's for a very specific audience. And so is it that it's linked to an academic paper at all, or do you also need to go through and start to understand what's in the academic paper? Because my sense, based on my own experience, is that paper is going to be even more dense and cumbersome than a blog post.
The first place I would start is read to answer your question, yes, it should just have a paper, period.
Okay.
Right? Like a paper exists that was peer reviewed, because that's, as you know, that's a lot of work.
Oh, my goodness, yes. It is, yes.
You don't do it lightly. It's not something you burn a lot of hours on unless you think it's important. That said, the blog post probably is more accessible than the paper itself. And in this case, that is 100% true. I've read the paper, and the paper is not a lot of fun. The blog post is slightly more fun, but it's still about as exciting as watching grass grow. However, this paper talks about the way that they deploy a specific kind of deep learning on Twitter to decide all of its recommendations. So when you're on Twitter, for example, you will see recommendations of every kind. You will see, let's pull up twitter.com here. So on the Trust Insights Twitter, you will see, hey, here's some people we suggest you follow. If you go to the home timeline, here's some tweets that we recommend that you take a look at. If you go to the Explore tab, here's some more things that, here's some trends that we think you should be looking at. All of these are these are all recommendation engines at work. Once you know that, and you pair it with this paper on this specific type of neural network and how it makes its recommendations, suddenly you can now go, oh, I know what's fueling each of these things. So if I want Trust Insights to be shown up in the who to follow section here, I need to understand this technology. If I want to understand why Ali Schwanke's tweet is showing up here, I need to understand that recommendation engine.
I would say this with the caveat. So if you go back to that article that you had up, Chris, I just want to note that the date on that, at least from my screen, looks like January 2021.
That's right. And
so the recency of an article and or especially an academic paper is also a factor. So, I think it depends on the industry that you're in terms of how quickly academic papers can be turned around. In technology, they're faster than clinical research for obvious reasons. But keep in mind, an academic paper that's 2 years old could be completely irrelevant because of the amount of time it takes to put it together and publish it and peer review it and then get it out there. So I would say also proceed with caution, especially with knowing how quickly a lot of this technology changes. If you're looking at this article, for example, it's 2 years old now. And so I would say it's going to give you a good understanding of what it was, but it may very well have changed since then.
That's right. And for some of the smaller articles, I think that's a good caution to to take into account. When you have cornerstone technologies, like something that is a major part of someone's infrastructure, that will probably change a little bit less.
Mm-hmm.
If newer articles were not also linking to this one, I would be concerned that this one's out of date. But some of the posts as of a couple months ago are still linking to this one as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's still relevance. So let's dig into this just a bit and answer the question: what does this tell us about how Twitter works? Without going into the mathematics, which you're welcome to go through, because it actually is fairly interesting.
Thank you.
A graph neural network is a type of machine learning that looks at the relationships between entities, people, or tweets, or people tweeting, for example, and tries to understand and make predictions about what an entity is likely to do next. So, for example, if I follow Katie and Katie follows me and John follows me, your logical next recommendation should be John should follow Katie too, right? That's a very, very primitive example of using this type of thinking. If John follows me but does not follow Katie, but I engage with Katie's tweets, right? The algorithm should say, from a predictive aspect, probably show Katie's tweet to John to see if John will engage with it, and then learn from that. Like, yes, showing Katie's dog pictures, John engages with them, but when Katie shows cat pictures, John does not engage with them. So you have so these learnings that this graph network is applying not to everybody, but to between individual people. And that's a critical part of understanding how social networks in general work, but especially Twitter, is the recommendations in the algorithm are not global. They are unique to at some level to the individual person, and then more broadly to these clusters within the network. So there is sort of a trust insights world on Twitter of people we follow, people who follow us. And within that, because of the way graph neural networks work, there's a higher probability that people are going to see stuff that's topically related, will recommend us more. But somebody who is maybe just as many degrees away from us, but not in that world, will not see us as often. So that's an important part of understanding how these graph neural networks work.
It sounds like, and I'm glad you used the word degrees, it sounds very much like that goofy 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon game, where the closer you are to the person who's right in the middle of the circle, the more likely you are to be able to interact. And then the farther, as you get to be like 5th degree, 6th degree, 7th degree, once you're 7th degree, at least in that game, like you don't even count anymore. So you need to be closer by degrees. And so thinking about it in that construct, I can wrap my head around it.
Exactly. Now, here's what's novel about Twitter's implementation is they have gone from just a regular graphic network, which is, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, and it started to embed time. So it's not just John engaged with me or Katie engaged with John or John follows Katie. It's also how long ago that happened. So as time passes between messages, between follows, retweets, likes, etc., the more time that passes, the more that data gets embedded into each node, and then the recommendations change. So if John and Katie are constantly talking to each other in rapid frequency, if I follow them, I'm probably going to see the other person higher probability because of the time embeddings in this temporal graph network, as opposed to if they had engaged with each other a year ago and hadn't engaged since. That recommendation engine, because the time factor is so much further away, I will go, oh, okay, well, the engine will say it's not as relevant to you. So the key takeaway from understanding a temporal graph network is, yes, you have to follow and be followed and engage and be engaged with, but it has to be recent. Twitter is an engine of recency. And so if people do not understand that, like, oh, well, we're just going to tweet once a day. Great. Then you were behind that account, that annoying account that tweets 30 times a day, because the temporal embeddings that go into these accounts. So you can't tweet garbage, right? Because the engagements still matter, but you need to be engaging and frequent. That's what this paper tells us.
Got it. Well, and it's interesting because I feel like people would sort of selective listen and hear that what you're saying is, I just need to tweet more and I'll be fine. But it's deeper than that. There's more layers to it. There needs to be a certain level of engagement with those frequent posts that you're putting up. it needs to be the right kind of engagement, and the engagement needs to be recent, or else the connection starts to really kind of degrade, and then you get put down to the bottom of the list again in terms of the algorithm.
Exactly. Because
Okay.
the part of what this paper also talks about is that the embeddings occur, the time embeddings co-occur with other embeddings. And an embedding is just a fancy word for a variable: likes, comments, retweets, etc., reshares, replies, etc. All those things are statistical things that are embedded into the relationship that any two nodes, any two people on Twitter have with each other. So yeah, if you were just talking to the air, like, musing to the ether about whatever topic you is on your mind these days, and nobody engages with it, yes, the temporal embeddings will be fresh, but there's no engagement, so there's nothing that will tell the network, oh, this person stuff is relevant to these people. Let's show this person to these people because there's a relationship there. So that's a critical part too. Is you can't just be fast; you have to be fast and good.
So let me ask you this question, though, and maybe you'll get into this as part of, the takeaways of this paper. So it sounds like so far, if I were a marketing manager trying to understand, okay, how do I, make my Twitter account better? It sounds like I need to post more and get more engagement. Did I really need to read a paper? Because that sounds like a general best practice anyway. So what is the paper telling me about the specifics versus what my gut is telling me to do?
In this case, I think it lends, people don't think about the timeliness as much, right? Of the importance of frequency and recency. Yes, tweet valuable content is a pretty broad, well-known trope these days, but we did not know that time was explicitly a not just part of the equation, but a fundamental underpinning of the model. And that to me is what's different about this, is saying, okay, time is as important as your tweet quality. It's not just in the mix, like it is a peer of quality. So it is theoretically possible that as long as you're talking about the relevant topics, because that's discussed in another paper, that you could be seen more by unrelated people who are interested in that topic just on the timeliness alone. But the engagements obviously help boost that substantially more.
Got it. So, and I have to say this or else I'll just keep dwelling on it in my head. So, for example, so I am 1 degree from Kevin Bacon. However, my connection point to Kevin Bacon is a relationship that stems from high school, which I haven't been in for
a while.
And so therefore, just because I can claim that I have 1 degree to Kevin Bacon, it doesn't really matter all that much in this context of this algorithm, because my connection point is over 20 years old. Therefore, the time has degraded, and there's going to be other people who have the same degrees to that single source that are newer, that are more recent, that are more active.
Exactly. Now, if the same person you had lunch with last week, your ability to say, hey, could you pass a message to Kevin, would be much higher.
Got it. So that makes sense. So I'm trying to put it into a context that my sometimes non-technical brain can try to wrap around it. John, I don't want to monopolize. What kind of questions or reactions do you have to all of this?
Well, the thing is that this just really highlights the stuff that we see spread, right? All of this, oh, hey, tell us about a movie with a great soundtrack, or what's your last favorite 3 things on your photo roll, like all that kind of stuff. It's not that compelling, but people are do interact with it, and they do it immediately, and that's the kind of stuff that spreads like wildfire. It's not that it's any good, but it's the kind of stuff that I'd love to tell you about the last TV show I saw, or
bingo. This is why misinformation spreads so easily, because it's immediately believable, it gets you engaged, and it's fast.
Well, that's depressing. What else you got, Chris?
So let's move on to LinkedIn. But no, I would encourage people again to dig into these papers, because that, again, the so what is, I understand now why some content does better than others, and why asking people on Twitter, pineapple on pizza, right? Immediate engagement, fast engagement, frequent engagement, all those things are things that a temporal graph network would naturally favor.
I was talking with someone yesterday who mentioned that pineapple can go on pizza if it's paired with a meatball. And I
can
thought
see that a little sweet and savory.
And I think that's what it was. And I understand that that's the whole idea. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of pineapple on pizza, but I can understand why it's something that's more universal versus niche.
Mhm.
And people can respond to it quickly and engage with it quickly and then move on.
Exactly. And the more universal it is, the more engagement you'll get, which means the the edge strength between two nodes grows. So you have pineapple on pizza. Which way does your toilet paper go? Over or under? DC or Marvel? Do you wear shoes in the house? Should you wear socks with sandals? Apple or Android? All these things are they're chewing gum, right? They're non-nutritious, but they get people doing something. And that, by the way, actually also is something that we've talked about for private social networks to generate community engagement as well.
Mm-hmm.
So same process applies to LinkedIn. LinkedIn has an engineering blog, and they have, what's interesting about LinkedIn is that LinkedIn has so many different components and pieces, and it's difficult to understand that all these pieces are related to each other, and that the underlying technology talks to each other in ways that should inform our behavior on LinkedIn. So let's look at a couple of different things. I'm going to review each of these pieces relatively quickly, and then we can talk about how they integrate together. The first is the skills graph. So every time LinkedIn processes your data based on what you've put in, it's building a natural language model of who you are. And one of the things that they've done is they've built in what's called an inferred skills graph. They have a structured list of data so that they understand, if you post about artificial neural networks, you probably know about machine learning. You probably know about deep learning. You probably know about statistics. So even if those skills are not on your LinkedIn profile, it understands from a topic perspective, you probably know about those things, and those things are probably important to you. So LinkedIn looks at a few different things. They look at you and as the person and what's on your profile. They look at you and your content, the language you use in your content, and they look at your network and the profiles and the content your network talks about. And all of that together gets sort of mashed up into this understanding of what's likely to appeal to you. When you look at the papers that talk about how LinkedIn decides what to show you in its newsfeed, they show all the different interaction features and embeddings that go into this model to say, okay, because you probably know about machine learning, and because you're connected to these people, you'll probably like a post about X. And so it will show you that. And then obviously it takes into the engagement measures. Like if I show you a post about artificial neural networks, Katie, and you don't engage with it, like, okay, clearly, even though your network says you might like that, you yourself don't. And so that will change. Those weights will change. Here's where it gets interesting. Because of the way LinkedIn is set up, its architecture governs a lot of what gets shown. So, for example, you'll see all this random advice on LinkedIn, like, oh, you should be posting videos and you should be posting this and that, and this gets higher engagement and stuff. When you look at the underlying architecture for how they design things like product search, there's only two categories of content. There's articles and posts. That's it. So from a content structure, those are the only two major chunks of data. So a post is anything you put in that isn't an article. And an article, of course, is the long form content that you put on LinkedIn. Your newsletter, for example. If you take a look at the Trust Insights free LinkedIn course we have, it's a trustinsights.ai/LinkedIn course. One of the things we talk about in the course is, if you're building your personal brand, you must publish a newsletter. Like, just, you got to do it, because because of you. If you look at the way the Search Federation works about how their internal databases work, articles, including newsletters, are treated differently than posts. So your article will typically get more engagement and more spread than a similar post. However,
so go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna This is one of those moments where like my brain is working so hard to try to keep up and have intelligent conversation about this. So I guess there's two things that I want to sort of comment slash ask. So the first one being, it sounds like in some ways, you know, like if I'm not saying it works identically, but it sounds like in some ways it's similar to the way that we think about semantic SEO, so related keywords. So if you know about artificial intelligence, you likely also know about machine learning. And so again, sort of trying to wrap my brain about it around it that way. So it's obvious it doesn't work the exact same, but it's a similar idea. The second observation slash question, and this is true for Twitter as well, is we're talking about, so let's say you share with me an article on artificial intelligence and I don't engage with it. It sounds like the algorithm decides, okay, that's not the right thing to be showing to Katie. She didn't engage with it. But it doesn't take into account the fact that maybe I was just really busy that day and couldn't get to it, but I want to engage with it. And I just don't have time to. And so like, I feel like that piece, that actual human behavior piece, is missing from both Twitter and LinkedIn. And I don't have a solution for that, but it's more of an observation of like, it's making assumptions, but it knows nothing about me. Maybe I'm on vacation and there's 10 articles that would have shown up in my feed that would have been amazing for me, but I'm never going to see them because I wasn't there to actually see them.
It depends. So age, particularly on Twitter, is a factor. Less so on LinkedIn, because it's looking at probabilities, right? So if you don't read that article today, but in the past you've read articles, 6 days later, there's a probability that will reoccur. I mean, we've all been on LinkedIn where a post shows up that's like a week old. Like, where did this come from? I have seen posts resurface on LinkedIn that are 2 months old. Like, why did this come now? Oh, because it's about this thing related to this person that I'm connected to, and so on and so forth. So the the neural network is experienced enough with my member history to resurface things when there's evidence that I might engage with it. Because LinkedIn has 3 different measures of engagement under the hood, and this is in one of the multitask papers. There is passive consumption, there's active engagement, and then there's upstream engagement. And there's 2 or 3 different papers to talk about this. Passive consumption is what is the likelihood you're even going to read an article or a post, right? And there's a probability engine to guess that. There is active consumption. What is the probability you are going to like, comment, or share a piece of content? And then there's upstream engagement, where what is the probability of this creator being engaged by these metrics to create more? One of the things that makes LinkedIn very different from every other social network, and one of the reasons we like it, is that there are incentives built into its algorithm for creators to reward them by getting them higher levels of engagement, to keep them creating, to encourage them to create more. So if you go on LinkedIn and you post once and not much happens, like, okay, whatever. But if that post then suddenly does well for a little while, what does that incentivize you to do? Like, oh, I like that little validation. Maybe I'll do that again. And so part of the algorithm is balancing the things that make creators happy so that they continue to contribute to the platform.
Got it.
Okay. Let's dig into the relevance of content, because this is the meat and potatoes of how LinkedIn decides, how LinkedIn understands the content it's going to show. It goes through 3 big passes. There's a first pass that sort of establishes some basic metrics and says, okay, this should be considered or not considered. The second pass is, okay, let's rank that stuff, and then the third pass is, okay, let's try displaying that stuff. So in that first, if you think about it, this is very similar to Google, right? Crawl, index, rank, and then display. So very, very similar. In that crawl / index phase, there's 4 different models that work together. It's the P13N model. That's a translation model. It basically says, if I post in Spanish, probably show my post to other people who speak Spanish, right? Probably show it to people who engage with Spanish language content. Don't show my post to people who engage with Russian language content. The second is the relevance quality model. So the relevance quality model is what we in SEO you would just call term document relevance. So if I search for or I talk about machine learning, is the piece of content that's being evaluated about machine learning, right? Yes or no? If it's not topically relevant, then probably give it a thumbs down. So if I post about influencer marketing and fashion, a machine learning post that is being evaluated to be shown to me probably is going to get the thumbs down. Like, nah, I don't think this member is going to be interested in this piece of content. The third one is the content quality model, and this is very, very specific. LinkedIn says this is query agnostic document quality, i.e. static rank. Those are magic words if you understand.
Say that again. Query
agnostic document quality, i.e. static rank.
I think my eye just started twitching.
When everyone talks about, you need high quality content on LinkedIn, everybody else goes, what does that mean? What is quality content? Right? Does it mean more pictures or dancing animals? What does that mean? The keyword phrase here is static rank. This is essentially a measure of centrality. What does that mean? It's page rank. So it means inbound links is what that means. When you have all the when you have content, how many people link to that content? It doesn't matter if it's a dog, a cat, or 5 ways to for your founders to get lines of credit. Whatever it is, if the member and their content is getting inbound links, i.e. mentions or reshares from other people in the network, that goes into the content quality model. That is what content quality means. It's inbound links. It's SEO for LinkedIn. And then the fourth one, hey, there's our old friend recency, right? So time is in this model as well. That's the first pass. The second stage is the member context, right? So this is a question of, for this piece of content, what is the context of the member and their first degree network? If I'll give you a real world example here. 3 weeks ago, literally nobody in my network had any idea, including myself, about this TV show Warrior Nun, right? And then I got involved with this whole bunch of people. Now this is a topic that I post about, and suddenly the model's like, should I even show this? Because this does not match the context of me in my first degree connections, right? So some of that stuff will do less well because LinkedIn's like, I don't see what this has to do with all your connections. All your connections are about marketing analytics, and you're talking about a TV show. Like, why? So there's a potential for that to be downranked there, which is why it's very important for you to be somewhat thoughtful about who you let into your LinkedIn network, right? As first degree connections. If you just let in every Tom, Dick, and Harry, who's got their multi-level marketing Ponzi scheme they're hawking, or their crypto or whatever scheme they're hawking this week, that changes your context, which means it's going to change what you see on LinkedIn, right? So we want to be a little bit thoughtful. And then we have affinity and other nearline features. So again, these are the things like, who do I interact with the most? If I like something and I interact with, say, our friend Justin Levy a lot, when a post comes up for consideration in Justin's feed, it's going to look at how often I've engaged with that post of that creator and say, Chris engages with this a lot. Chris is friends with Justin. He'll show this post to Justin and see if he likes it too, because of that affinity. And then it goes into the how you do the actual display of the content itself. So this is LinkedIn's, the entirety of the algorithm, of the components that go into this system to decide what to show. Once you understand those different components, you go, okay, I should write content in intelligible language. I should have, my content should be relevant to the terms and things I want to be known for. My content should be linked to and shared by other people. So even when you write a LinkedIn post, like, hey, please share this with your network, or please, everyone's like, leave a comment. Like, yeah, I'll leave a comment, but get people to share your stuff. This says be on LinkedIn, right? Now, don't just stop in like once a day for like 2 seconds. Actually spend some time, do some activities. Member context, engage with other people's content. Now, to your point, Katie, from previously, this is not new information, right? Be on LinkedIn and be relevant. It's not new information, but the new information for us is the page rank stuff, which is not something that's commonly talked about on LinkedIn, and the fact that these features occur in 2 different passes. And so LinkedIn's algorithm looks at the quality of the content first, and then your network, right? So that's a really important thing. So it's not just making stuff for the people that you like, but it's making stuff that is high quality first that people will link to, and then sharing it with a well-chosen network.
What strikes me in both of these examples, both LinkedIn and Twitter, is that there's talk about your network, but there's not a lot of talk about building your network, relationship building. Because I feel like the way that, I mean, and this is just might be my interpretation, but the way it's being described is that it's, for just like growing, your awareness, but, you know, it doesn't factor in that you need to take time to build that network, to foster those relationships, to get that trust, even if it's just over a social network, to say, you know what, I trust that when John posts something, it's going to be good quality. So I feel comfortable sharing it. And so it doesn't, again, sort of the human behavior side of it doesn't take into account what I consider to be good and trustworthy. I feel like that's very subjective. And that's going to be harder for these algorithms to pin down. I would imagine that, like, John would feel comfortable posting anything that comes from Trust Insights because he knows us. He knows the kind of content that we put out. He's part of the process of that content creation. And so that inherent trust is not something you can build into an algorithm.
It's not something you can build into an algorithm explicitly, but it finds its way in there implicitly. I was trying to find a piece that they did not too long ago about the people you may know section, because that algorithm itself has a lot of the human side. Here is optimizing people you know for equity and content creation. So they talk about the model behind the people you may know and how it recommends, who you're going to see and who they're, I think we talked about this. I want to say last year sometime. One of the things that is in the people you may know algorithm is a propensity model for dealing with people who, it basically says some people don't like getting lots of random connections. So the more of these invites that are sort of stacking up in your inbox, the less you are going to show up in people you may know, because LinkedIn's like, clearly this person is not engaging with it. So let's show you less in the recommendations for people to grow your network. If you keep this clean, even if you just hit ignore like over and over again, you're keeping it clean, and therefore you're going to be shown more. So just a very simple tactical thing from this part of the LinkedIn algorithm. And again, this all goes back to those language models to say, okay, who are we going to show you? People who match your skills, people who match your content, people who have affinities like schools you went to or companies you worked at in the past. That's going to be shown and ranked higher in these systems. LinkedIn in particular is very good about trying to identify people would be good candidates for your network. Twitter less so, but because Twitter focuses so heavily on its temporal graph network that it doesn't pick as people, I think, as well in terms of the people that you should follow as LinkedIn does. LinkedIn has more data to draw from. It has richer data to draw from. It has much more personal information to draw from just off the bat because of your profile and things. And so I think because of that, it does a better job. So is it explicit in the product? Not necessarily, but are there parts of the product that are designed to help you broaden your network and grow? Yes. And if you know how those pieces work, they work pretty well.
It's interesting that there's kind of this push-pull then of you want to have as many followers as you possibly can to increase your odds of stuff being shared or forwarded and engaged with to rise up. But at the same time, you don't want to be following all the garbage accounts, because that would hit you in that second stage where it would presume that none of these other people want to see this stuff. So it would actually stop showing your stuff. So you kind of, you have to, that has to be actively managed to be optimized.
Exactly. And if you think about it, it makes total sense, right? If you're just being followed by a bunch of bots, they're not going to reshare your content and things like that. And LinkedIn wants the highest quality content shown to real people. And so if your entire LinkedIn network is junk, then yeah, your stuff's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to get accelerated. It's not going to get seen. If, on the other hand, you're adhering to the 8 or 9 different pieces of the algorithm that we know is part of the architecture, your chances of being seen go up dramatically.
Yeah, I'm one of those people who notoriously has a bunch of outstanding, not looked at invites, connections in my LinkedIn network because I have this rational slash irrational fear that the second I connect with someone, they're immediately going to pitch me something. So I mostly just ignore it unless I know someone. And I'm just looking, I had 24 outstanding, which I feel like isn't that bad, but I still had 24 outstanding that I needed to do something with. So I can go through
Hmm.
and clean those up. But yeah, it's,
Yep.
yeah.
Here's the thing about LinkedIn that is, again, something that's I love about LinkedIn that I wish other social networks would do. LinkedIn has, and there's a whole paper on this. It's called multi-objective optimization, and they talk about the different factors they use for optimizing, the member experience. One of those factors that no other network does is complaints. Right. So if you complain, if you do have a complaint style action of some kind, that weights very heavily in the network. So when I accept an invitation from somebody, they immediately slap me with a sales pitch. I hit block and I hit report, right?
Mhm.
And I report them for spamming me. What does that do to their reputation? They now have a big old honking red flag on them
Mhm.
for a while that says this person has been complained about, right? And this is a problem. And so they get downranked pretty dramatically, pretty quickly. So it's a way for LinkedIn to say because what LinkedIn desperately needs is they need to hold on to their users, because that is the product that they sell
Mhm.
in their HR software is users. So they cannot afford to lose people, because someone's spamming this political cause or that other thing, or handing out, doing inappropriate behavior in direct messages. The moment you hit complaint, you're basically sticking a big old red flag on that person's back to say, like, yeah, this person could be problematic. And if enough people do that, that person goes into the end of the algorithm. Like, you go to the end of the line, you never get seen again.
Mhm.
Whereas compare that to Twitter, particularly after the management change, where basically the trust and safety team is gone, complaining does nothing. You don't even
Mhm.
find out if actions been taken. It becomes a much more of a cesspool very, very quickly. So with LinkedIn, that's a major factor in its favor. That means that you can accept those connections more readily. And it's also a warning for anyone who's listening that if you are that person who immediately sends a sales pitch, you're going to get the crap smacked out of you.
Right. Oh, well, we have been, or Chris, you have been explaining to myself and John for well over 45 minutes how Twitter and LinkedIn algorithms work. I can say that my head hurts, but it has been incredibly informative because I feel like it reinforces the things that we make assumptions about, but it gives us that more granular point of view of like how to approach. And the big thing that I'm taking away from this is that you cannot just have one blanket social strategy across platforms. You have to treat each individual platform as its own thing. And so for Twitter, it's frequency and recency. LinkedIn, same is frequency and recency, but also the things that your profile says you're interested in, the way in which you engage, the amount of people that you have engaged with, in your network and brought into your network. So there's nuance. It's similar but different.
That's exactly right. And the other thing I would say is that we talked a lot about how to think about deconstructing these algorithms. And one thing I want to go back to that John said at the very beginning of the show is, if you have a question about a feature of some kind, how many hashtags should you put in a tweet or whatever, the data from these services is something you can export, and you can run that statistical analysis yourself, so that you can say, yes, it turns out for our audience, our little corner of Twitter, maybe the number of hashtags does matter. I was answering this question to some PR folks, and they're like, well, how many hashtags does matter? And I would show them, here's a statistical map of the factors that get Twitter engagement. Hashtags is a zero, has no relevance, none whatsoever, within this entire little ecosystem. And like, so stop obsessing about it. It doesn't matter. It has never mattered, but it definitely does not matter now. And I would encourage that. And that's another way to pick apart these algorithms, is to do your own statistical testing so that you can say, yeah, these factors do not matter. Let's not worry about them. Let's focus on the tried and true, which is create good content and build a strong network of people to share it.
And I think most importantly, we slash Chris can be the one to decipher all of these academic papers and help you put together that strategy for the specific algorithm. So if you hit us up, trustinsights.ai/contact, you will first get to talk to John. John will, talk to you all about his Twitter and LinkedIn experiences. And then Chris can absolutely help you decipher what works specifically for you. Because I think that's the other piece of it is these papers are talking about the general, how they work. As you have your own specific network, your own specific audience, the way in which, Chris, you approach posting on Twitter is going to be different from how I approach it. It's going to be different from how John approaches it, because we're three different people with three different agendas, three different styles, content, etc., all those things. So it's still going to have to be personalized.
Exactly right. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this week. So we will see you all next time. Take care. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.